Okay, why don't we begin right now? My name is Ron Rockland. I was born in the Bronx. I went to the Dewa Clinton High School. I won't tell you when I was born. No, wrong workshop, sorry. But it actually does lead into the workshop, because when I did go to school a long, long time ago for electrical engineering, the concept was look to the right, look to the left. This kind of discussion we have now was not something they would ever have before. Hopefully you're going to get something out of it. We have a panel, Bruce Bukiet from the Department of Mathematics and also Associate Dean at CSLA, Glenn Goldman, who's Director of School of Art and Design and Professor and Director of the Imaging Lab, and Gordon Thomas, Professor of Physics. And what we're going to do is a panel where I'm going to be showing slides, but I'm not going to be reading slides. A lot of the slides are just going to be basically concepts on good teaching, so, most of which I've used and other people have looked at as well. We've given parts of these talks a number of times through TLT workshops, which I would encourage everyone to look at. And what we're going to try to do is have a discussion both with the panel, but also welcome comments from you. We have the microphones. Shout out an answer to, and I'll repeat the answer if you're too far away from the microphone. We have Joe Bonci run. I want to start off with 1 minute story, and the story goes back to 1995 when I started here at NJIT. And the dean at the time, Dean Swart, it was about 6 or 7 deans ago, took me out to dinner. And he said, basically, why do you want to come to NJIT? And I said, I want to teach. He said, no, you don't. I said, yes, I do. He said, no, you don't. I was smart enough to not argue again. I relied on my heritage and decided to answer the question with a question. Well, what do you think? And what he said basically is the formation for this first slide. You want to facilitate. And this is my basic premise for a long while, is I am not a teacher, lecturer, instructor. I'm a facilitator of learning. And if you think that, if you were to walk away right now, it'd be kind of sad, but if you walked away right now, just thought about that one thing. The perspective is not how good we feel, is did we impart knowledge to the students? Any comments from my panel right now at all? Or is there general agreement on that?
Sure. My story is a similar one. I was asked by my department chair to teach a course. And what I realized is that I would have to facilitate this course because in the several previous years to my taking it over, it had failed 90% of the freshmen. And that just didn't make sense to us at all. And what I did in order to facilitate the course rather than teach it is I started out trying to present the material that I wanted to present very cleverly, but I quickly realized that they needed help with parts of the course, some of the basic concepts, in the context of the course. And I gave them an evaluation of their skills in the context of the course and found that my teaching of the physics was fine, but their basic skills in this context needed tremendous help. And so what I started doing is teaching those basic skills as well as the physics. And then I found that I could make the course rigorous. And we managed to have 90% pass the course. That is what I think of as facilitating, and that's what I think of as addressing the most important question that we have to address here, which is improving the rate at which we manage to graduate students.
Anyone else? Glenn?
Well, I think in part being a facilitator is also being a guide to a structured scenario where you help students learn what it is they need to know. And that includes not only what happens in front of the class or alongside the students, but also in the types of assignments and projects that are created that require students to learn something in order to demonstrate that they understand concepts. It's a little bit different especially in the design fields where much of the work is project-based. And in some ways, that kind of answers a lot of the questions that other people have had. While we do lecture, but they're always tied into producing something. We make stuff, and whether we make it virtually or physically or as a prototype, there's always something beyond just the class that we hope will engage the students to learn certain skills along the way.
Yeah, let me ask a question, the audience. How many of you ever have given what you thought was a great lecture and just really felt good about it? Raise your hands. Any hands? Okay. When you did that, did you think about students learning? I'm not saying you did or didn't, but that's really the key. I don't expect a standing ovation after my lecture. I never got one. But what I do hope is that students learn. And that's what we're going to try to talk about. First thing we're going to talk about, since this lecture, is engagement. Not that kind of engagement. That's not the right engagement. Is this student engaged? How many of us have seen this kind of student? So the question really is, what is engagement? To track, to please, to occupy? Are we occupying the students? Where do you think that kind of student would be in a classroom? What would be causing that student to sleep other than probably working hard? What? He was studying at night. But what about the fact that maybe he wasn't engaged? Maybe he was just listening to an hour's worth of talk. If I did that, how many of you would be falling asleep? I would probably fall asleep as well. Absorb, engross, interest, involve. That's student-centered, not us. And the question is, why engage students? Well, one of it is they'll learn better. An engaged student is going to be feeling better about their subject and is going to be learning. Gee, we talk about retention. An engaged student, a student that feels engaged, is going to be staying in school. Be more positive as well. Isn't that what we really want to do? So the question is, how do we do engagement? How do we actually figure out some of the aspects? What do you think the picture on top is? If I talk about engagement, who is engaging those students? It's the faculty. In the bottom, does anyone see a faculty there? There's really two types of engagement. One is faculty engaged, and I'm going to talk about a number of aspects, and we'll talk about it in the panel and listen. But the other is pedagogy. Structure the course so that it involves engagement. And engagement is not something that will delay you teaching everything you need to know. Here are some aspects. And again, I'll go to my panel. Active learning, which we'll be talking about, collaborative learning, student presentations where they're presenting, kind of delivery, critiques, site visits, competitions, senior projects to lower levels, even studio concept labs. And I know definitely, Glenn, in architecture, there is definitely engagement. Want to talk about just a little bit from the studio standpoint? Or?
Well, in all of the, in all the studios, but especially in freshman year, whether it's in architecture or in the foundation year in art and design, there's a combination of new information that's provided to the students, and that's done in various ways. Some of it's online, some of it's through lecture, some of it's through video. We try to use multiple media in order to get that information across. And then it's project-based. And then in the studio itself, there's time for one-on-one critique where students have opportunities to interact with the instructor. There's also group presentations where students will present to their colleagues and their colleagues will give criticism. We will involve upper-class students who will come down and then give criticism to the students based on the projects of the freshmen, and that helps the upper-class students hone their own critical skills. It's a little bit less intimidating for the freshmen, and it starts to introduce freshmen to upper-class students so that they have other people to go to besides faculty. It should be clear, I don't know how many people realize that this type of pedagogy is very time intensive. So a 5-credit studio will meet nominally for 13 to 15 hours per week. So the faculty members with the students, 13 to 15 hours per week. And I have never, and this is more than 30 years now, have never spent less than that per week with the studio. So frequently a faculty member, and it doesn't matter if it's adjunct or lecturer or tenure track, they could spend an extra 2 to 4 hours per week on average with the students, depending on the size of the group. So it is a very time-intensive program. It does break down a lot of barriers between students and faculty become, the studio instructors become the people that students will often go to for advice and for information. So, and even, as I said, where in the freshman class in the foundation years, we have, there's a little bit more in terms of lectures and information because we're trying to condense time or condense information within a course. There's still always lab sessions, critique sessions, and then additional sessions scheduled outside of the normally scheduled hours. And also, most of the faculty are pretty good about responding to questions about their projects offline for critiques. We had a bunch of athletes. I had one 2 years ago who was at a track meet, who's on the track team, and in between her events, she had her laptop and she was sending me, she was working on a project, sending me images, and then I was giving her criticism online, and then she continued to work on it. So there's a lot of that, but again, it takes time to do your job well.
Bruce?
Sure. I just want to go back to some of the things that the students said earlier about there's a place for motivation as well. It's not just delivering the material. The students said that they wanted to be motivated, and I think that it's important to work that in to your courses as well. I think that what you do in studio is actually pretty amazing with the number of different things that you do, but even in a more standard course, I don't know if you scared me a little bit. I don't know if you scared some people in the audience, but I think that one can work your way toward varying things, whether you're bringing in motivation, whether you're bringing in problem solving, whether in groups or not, or asking them to watch a video in the evening so that you're breaking it up. The students were talking about don't lecture at me, right? I think somebody said that, don't lecture. Well, I think a lot of what we do here is lecture, and I think it's about mixing it up. It shouldn't just be straight lecturing and creating the barriers with students, but there's a role for all these different things. I don't think that any one method of teaching or any one method of learning works all the time for all people, and I think that the best thing is that you engage students well when you vary things. And I think that they're doing a great job in studio, but I think that there's a lot, maybe less onerous things that we could do that can still improve the student learning and motivation.
Okay, and I think we're going to be talking about a few techniques within I'll call a more traditional class than the studios. If we're going to talk about what to do, what not to do, and again, I'll reiterate this constantly. I mean, I know many of you, we have university lecturers, and sometimes I'm always get concerned about that word because people think, well, if I'm a university lecturer, I need to lecture. That's not what we should do. Now, I don't know if you can see that picture that highly, but anyone have an idea of what that cartoon represents? Little slideshow, hangman. Death by PowerPoint. I'm not saying, I mean, I'm doing PowerPoint right now, but there are ways to do PowerPoint that give you a means of interacting, and there is a way of doing a 20-minute conference type of presentation for an hour. Don't do that. You heard the students. They don't want that. The other thing I find anti-engagement is I must cover everything in my course and therefore I don't have time to engage. And you heard the kind of time that you need in the studio. You do have time to engage, and we'll talk about that, how it relates to things like learning outcomes and understanding what the course really should be about. Something that I just want to bring, any idea, I have 3 E's. What would an E be? This originally stemmed from actually in a formal life, it was like Shirley MacLaine. I was in sales, and there was a concept called 3 E's in selling. Anybody know what a good salesperson should have that relates to an E? Snap? No. Don't want to venture? What? Engagement. Okay. Close. Energy. I won't even touch that one. Enthusiasm. All right. Someone was in sales. The big 3s, really, and this is sales. Education, but education not in terms of degrees, the knowledge of the product. Enthusiasm is, again, you really like your product and you show it. You're not monotone. Gee, I heard that from the students. And empathy is you understand the customer needs. This is what makes a very good salesperson. And I've seen salespeople, I managed salespeople that had all that. And when I started teaching, I said, you know what? It's really not that different. Education, again, is not a degree. It's knowledge of the subject. You heard students. They want to feel that whoever is involved with the educational process knows that area, can impart that. Enthusiasm comes from students perceiving. And they will perceive, do you like what you're doing? Do you like teaching? And you really have to get into that in that mindset. And finally, empathy does not mean crying with your students. I've done that too. It means really understanding the students. And there are times where, not to say make exceptions, but understand some of the needs, relook at the syllabus and so forth. It's just my little concept. There's a lot of different concepts around, but just wanted to throw that out. But now we'll get to something called active learning. Active learning is not me walking around a classroom for about an hour and a half doing a half marathon. What is active learning to you? Actually, let me ask, any of the panelists get involved in active learning? I know you, Glenn, you do, but.
Well, to me, it means that the students have to be involved. Even, there's activity, if they're engrossed in the lecture and they're thinking, that's active. If they're working obviously together on solving problems, that's active. As long as their mind is engaged, it has to be more than, they're watching a TV show like a couch potato and just kind of drifting off. But any way that their minds are working and that they're involved, I would consider that active learning.
Yeah, and what won't they do if they are engaged in active learning in a classroom? Fall asleep or tune out. So that's the key thing. So the question is, how do we do that? I'll just give you one example, and I'll listen. I basically, when I give my, quote, lecture, I plan it out. And I make sure that if I use PowerPoint or any other things, it's a 10-minute rule. Once that's done, I stop, and I do something else. I have 1 to 2 team exercises within the classroom. And I'm teaching basically in electrical engineering technology, which is electrical engineering, but I want the students involved in projects and solving problems. It's not going to be hearing me talk about circuit theory for an hour. I think that's, again, we have to challenge ourselves. It's easy to create a 1-hour lecture. It is far more difficult to have spaces in between. You think so, Gordon? Or?
Absolutely. This is particularly a challenge with a large class. Mm-hmm. With a small class, you can have them do things, you can walk around, you can comment on what they're doing. But with a large class, this is a very difficult thing. One of the techniques is to do a demonstration. One of the best ways to do that is to have the students doing the demonstration. The difficulty that I have, of course, going back to what I was saying before, is that they don't need to just learn the physics. They need to learn a bunch of other things related to that are basic, like simple mathematics, like reading. And it is more challenging with a large class to switch gears and do different things, but those are some of the things that I do.
There are also some things that can be done that we unfortunately don't necessarily have the appropriate facilities or venue for, and in order to engage people, or to at least, if not engage them, at least keep them interested. One, and I've seen a number of schools have designed and created lecture halls where there is enough space between the rows so that the lecturer can actually wander around, going back and forth. I rarely stay up in the front when I'm lecturing. I try to do it in a room where I have room to walk around, and I don't stand still, and I don't lecture from notes. I lecture from whatever's on the screen anyway. So I can move around, and I can see that other people are looking, and it also solves the hiding behind the laptop screen problem, because you can see what people are doing, and you can start to judge as things are going. The other thing is, and there's a difference between watching television on a small screen or even on a couch in your home and going to a movie theater. And that has to do with the sense of immersion and the idea of creating a situation that will keep people interested because of the nature of the experience. And that's another, whether it's just still images or video or film clips or whatever, if you can get into a room or a space where the image is large enough to fill a good portion of the peripheral vision of the students, they are going to start to feel like they are inside whatever is going on. And these are things that can be done to the extent that I have a few places where I prefer to teach classes on campus, but I don't think there are enough of them. But if you can start to actually exploit the facilities that you have, there are opportunities for other types of engagement that have as much to do with the delivery as with the content.
And that also gets to that point, which you said before, and probably the biggest challenge is, what about covering the material and doing active learning? Because as you said, it takes time. And we're going to try to offer a little later some suggestions, and we'll hear from the panelists as well. I'm going to skip this right now because it's in the interest of time. There are a few things we don't need to do. Collaborative learning. What's a team? 2, 3, or more? How many think more than 3 is a good team? Anybody that dealt with teams? How many think that teams themselves are worth outside of the technical areas? If you had history class, humanities class, English class, can you do teams? Yeah. And again, the question is how to select teams. One of the things I've done the last 2 years is after I give 3 tests. After the first test, I look at the grades, and I actually try to mix teams together so I have someone who's appears very knowledgeable and someone mid and someone low. And the idea is that the student who is very adept at that subject can hopefully teach the others as well. Different ways of putting teams together. Again, part of the challenge is, how can I use the teams effectively? How can I use the teams with active learning? One thing I do, and again, this is in electrical engineering, I'll basically give an assignment and single students will work with it. Maybe I'll pair in 2, maybe I'll pair in 3. I try not to pair more than 3, because if I pair more than 3, usually 1 or 2 people are working on it, the other 2 are sort of talking around. But the idea is that you're interacting with your peers. And I think that's a way of learning and understanding. And when I call on people, I don't call on a single person, I call on a team. And I ask them to have a representative. The other thing is outside classroom. Can students get together outside? How can they do that? And how can you help them as well? What kind of technology could I use to get students to be working perhaps with each other outside the classroom? I'll give you a hint. It begins with an M. Moodle. And we'll talk about that when I talk about a thing called flipping the classroom as well. you don't have to do this much to show you care. But a couple of things that I think are worthwhile. One is I make a practice the first day, students who are absent, to contact them in a nice way. See, everything all right? You know, are you doing well? You know, we like to make sure everything's good. Why? Because that might be the student that's at risk. Might as well address it right away. Another thing I believe, and unfortunately my wife tells me I go overboard, is response to emails. I've been known to email as quickly as 5 seconds. I try not to do that too often. But within 24 hours, should a student expect a response? I would expect it. And the other thing is availability beyond the classroom or office hours. I know some people in my department actually do text. I do emails. I do using Moodle as well. What is some of your experiences in terms of showing how to care?
I mean, just going up to a student or even during class, you know, looking at them and just giving them that little extra attention. Students somehow know, and I've had students tell me this, that, you know, I've not done anything that I've noticed that's been special. You just treat them like a human being, I think, and a lot of students aren't even used to that, you know, in their lives as being treated as an adult, that, you know, people look at them as a kid. So, I mean, just if you focus on them, you look them in the eye when they're talking to you, they just somehow seem to know. It's just a body language thing, and really doesn't take terribly much effort.
Okay. Yes. Sure. Are you in this? Okay, good.
I have big classes, but I like to learn my students' names, and I call them by name.
Very good.
That tends to make them feel like they're special.
Yeah, I've tried lately with Moodle to insist students have pictures because I am horrible with names. I'm surprised I know my wife's name sometime, but you're right. That's a very good technique because if you call them again, it shows that you care. And the other techniques that people have here in the audience.
All my students have my cell phone number on day one. They all call me on my cell phone.
Okay, they call you on your cell phone. Yeah, so if you could just go to the microphone.
They can call me on my cell phone. They have their cell phone number on day one. And they can call me up to 11:30, 12 o'clock in the night.
Okay.
And second thing is I take their photograph on day one.
Mm-hmm.
I have a small album of all the photographs. So when somebody calls, I know who is the person, so I can connect up with him.
All right.
And I also assign projects. So when I write their names on my cell phone, I also write the name of the project by the side of their names, so that I know who is calling and I talk about their project. So that brings me closer to them.
Okay, good, good. And again, it's one additional thing that we need to be looking at. Value added. When I started working with technology, I started with PowerPoints. Eventually, I started with videos. I have my entire class basically online. I teach face-to-face. And one of the students, or actually one of the professors said, why should I go to your class then? And that's a really good idea, good question. And the real question that comes in, what value do I add? If I don't add any value, basically, you know what? The students have a right not to come to my class. And I think that's a challenge that we have to have, again, if we are facilitators of learning rather than instructors. Just a few little lists, and I'll be glad to open it up to others. I deal with problems. Well, I can deal with some problems on videos, but I deal with more problems. Students know that I'm going to be covering basically problems in class. Real-world solutions. I worked in industry for 25 years. I'll talk about that. It's not in my PowerPoint, it's not in my video, but in class I will deal with it. Also, war stories related to that. Different perspective material, again, active learning. If they're in class, they're going to be participating. If they're not in class, they're not going to be participating. And then working with others in a team. The question really is, if you are a student in your class, Would you want to come? And I know that sounds silly, but it's not. Because sometimes when you look at what you're doing, it may be, gee, what can I do to improve it? Any comments from my esteemed colleagues there? Okay, no, that's good. Interest of time, we can continue. 1 minute summary. I'm going to relate it a little later to something else I do, but a 1 minute summary is an interesting concept that I did a few years ago when I was teaching at night. I was teaching till 9:30, and by 9 o'clock, 9:50, it's getting, so what do? Are students really learning? What I do is I basically have something, and I'm sure everyone uses something different. I say, give me 3 things that you've learned in this class, and tell me up to three things that you're confused about. I use that second list as a means to cover in the next class. Why? I want to be able to have the students demonstrate that they've understood. And if they haven't, then they're going to slow down. It gets back to what we talked about before with mastery learning. I want students to demonstrate to me that they've mastered that one topic before I proceed and run away with it the next time. Online now, I do something called reflections, and actually I give points as homework for students to do that. I want feedback. And again, part of that is the caring itself. So these are just some suggestions that you have. My big thing here with flexibility, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that as well, so I'll read as a blackboard, as a veteran of academia. The curriculum, September, October, relearn the stuff from last year that you forgot over the summer. November to April, new stuff. May, final exams. June to August, forget all the above. And the real question, the challenge, is that it's student understanding, it's not a race. But you say, I have to cover all the material. Well, again, how do we set up the syllabus? How do we set up what we want to do? We just got a email. Yes, I did look at my email while some of the talks from our provost asking that all syllabi, not just new courses for UCRC, have outcomes. Well, our courses should be outcomes-based. Not basically, and I won't say all courses, but some courses, how do you do a course? Take a textbook, divide by 15, those are the topics. That's not the way to do it. But if it's outcomes-based, you know what you want to teach, what is important, what are priorities, and maybe what are some things that are extra not as important. It challenges you to relook, and I've done that for the last several years. And you'd be surprised there are things that you may not need to do. So if you have that, you can spend more time on active learning. You can spend more time on student understanding. Go ahead. I know physics is critical in terms of prerequisites of the courses. How flexible or inflexible do you feel with the courses you teach?
Well, in some of the physics courses, they're taught as a group where every professor has to be doing the same thing as every other professor. And it's very rigid. There are exams at specific times that have to cover certain materials. And I feel that it's relatively ineffective. And I don't know if I go so far as to say that I hate it, but I think it's, I'll say ineffective. When I teach a course like the one that I teach called Physics for Architects, that has only the sections that I teach as one unit. And then I can be flexible. I can teach the students what I want to do. I can emphasize things that are important for architects. I can go back and check and see if they're understanding the material that we've had. I can give them supplementary information about the basics, as I said before, and I find that's very effective. In the advanced courses that are smaller, and there's only one course by itself, then we can be very flexible. We can do projects, we can do group learning, and that I like tremendously.
open-ended questions. To me, the best, I've been on a lot of interviews. I used to give interviews when I was in industry. The best questions are open-ended questions. And again, why? Because real-world solutions aren't always exact. You don't have the thing, and that's probably, I don't know if it comes from high school, but students feel I need to get that one answer, one right answer. And I try to tell students there's not necessarily one right answer. And it's very difficult for them to understand that. But there's also more than one way of getting to that answer. And I think we have to be more understanding of the fact that if I teach a single method, that's not necessarily the method I need to do. Again, I go back to what I teach. Teach circuit law. Okay, here's a circuit. Solve it using that circuit law. That's what most textbooks are. Why? I want students to be able to think which is the best way to solve it. So again, the suggestion is get them to think, get them to a little higher level of thinking as well. Just one little thing that I came across last year, and I'll ask both the audience, just a show of hands, I'll take from the previous one. Students solving a problem, struggling with that problem. Could be math problem, it could be a computer program. Takes an hour and a half. They finally got it. Is that good or bad? How many think good? How many think possibly bad? Why bad? Well, I'll tell you, bad is when I give a test, I usually give about 3 problems. I have 1 hour. And the higher math tells me you have 20 minutes per problem. A student that works on a problem for an hour is not going to do well in my course. So what I've done the last year, I'm going to be doing even more this year, is teaching students how to take tests. And basically the concept is, and again, this is just one concept, 2 to 3 minutes, you have to come up with an idea, an approach, how to do the problem. 10 to 12 minutes, try to solve it. Maybe you take a little longer. Too many students seem to know what to do, but they don't recognize that they also have to do it in a quicker period of time. Again, just something to think about. I know math, I mean.
I would say that when you're learning it, it's fine to struggle for an hour,
Right.
an hour and a half, till you get it in and do it yourself, rather than looking in your online homework help thing or Wolfram Alpha and saying, oh yeah, that's how you do it, and then not really being able to do it. You struggle a few times, you really get it down, and then you practice, and then you work it down the time.
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Now, one thing that happened with one of our foundation classes where I was giving a final exam. There were about 7 or 8 projects during the semester, and there was a final, and the final was really testing things like the reading and understanding of the basic concepts. And even those who were doing well on the projects turned out not to do so well on the final exam. So the change that I made the following year was to introduce 3 quizzes in addition. This is in addition to all the projects and the final exam. And the quizzes weren't worth very much, but they had to be worth something. They were worth about 1% of the total grade. And it's this works best with freshmen because even though they have projects, for some reason they're conditioned to think, oh, it's a test or it's a quiz, even if it's a 10-minute quiz or whatever. Oh, therefore it's important. So they actually, the first quiz, which this time was only worth 1% instead of 20% for the final, most of them did pretty badly. But by the second quiz, they were doing better. In the third, they did well. In the final, I saw a significant improvement from the year before in both being able to take the test as well as to understand the material and understand the significance of the material. So I don't think that would work quite as well with our 4th-year students because by then most of them are so focused on the projects and what they're creating. But it seemed to work well as a transitional tool for freshmen.
Okay. We tend to want to create our own materials, and I've done a lot. But there's a wealth of outside materials. And if we view ourselves as really gatherers rather than creators, how many of you ever gone on Khan Academy? Great site. In fact, this year what I'm doing is I'm going through each math competency each week in one of my courses and relating 1 to probably 5 different videos that would help them. Hippopotamus, we have our own open source. And YouTube. There are good and bad, trust me, but good videos as well. It enhances, it gives another opinion. Mine is not the only way that students could learn. And if students could look at 2 or 3 different viewpoints, and you can provide them as well, again, that material, they may learn better. And that's what we really want to do. Inserting humor, I'll just skip. I mean, believe me, electrical engineering is not a humorous subject. You know, I talk about the priest, rabbi, and electron, but no. It relaxes students, and that's the only thing. I tend to throw humor. It also, I won't say brings me down, but it brings me a little closer to the level. Some students think you're a professor there, and that is not going to engage people. So you want to have that as well. I tend to use screen beams for art, so skip that. The last couple of things I just want to talk about are learning objects, learning outcomes, and relating to one last technique, and then we'll get some comments there. When you look at the students that we just saw before, YouTube is basically 10 minutes. Tweets, 140 characters. They don't think long, they take short. But when I first got into videos, I said, oh, I'm going to video my entire lecture. No, it was boring. I fell asleep. But if I looked at my lecture, it comprised of several different ideas or learning objects or chunks of learning. And if we challenge ourselves, we can go through any topic at all and do the same thing. And in doing that, you create what Khan Academy has done, which is basically short videos that relates to a chunk of learning. It is much easier for students to look at because sometimes they don't need all the videos. They don't need to listen to an entire hour or 2-hour lecture, which relates to learning outcomes. Howie Kimmel has this cartoon I love, and I think if we remember this cartoon, we'll remember a lot, which is, I taught Stripe how to whistle. The other boy says, I don't hear him whistle. The first guy says, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. Too many times we do it. And I will say that if we look at each of our courses, the programs, the departments, how many of us have syllabi, which is required, and how many of us have course learning outcomes, let alone program outcomes? We need to know what we're doing. I'll skip that. Again, student-centered. 2 other things, and I'll toss over to the panelists then to talk a little bit more, or a few minutes more, and then we'll cut. Technology, and I'm the co-chair for the TLT committee, so I look at technology. I hear about like bringing laptops, but technology should improve learning. It should not be used just for the sake of technology itself. I remember we had a discussion years ago about bringing laptops in. And my comment was, are the professors going to be using them? And if they're not, why are we having students bring in laptops or requiring them to bring in laptops? So that's a challenge. And what kind of technologies can be used? These are some, and I'm sure our esteemed panels, others. Moodle, basically for structure. It's not just I want to like Moodle, I like the word Moodle. It's actually, it structures my course. How many of you use Camtasia Relay? Again, if you have that learning objects and you want to create videos, it's the easiest way to create a video. You'd be surprised. WebEx, I want to have an extra learning section. You use it. I don't want to bring students on campus. You don't have to. Paper Show is something one day we will have a TLT workshop on. I create lots of videos. I used to do it in little PowerPoints. Now I just use a pad and I write. It shows on the screen. I could literally knock off 3, 4, 5 problems in an hour, which I then have the students look at. I know, I think physics uses iClickers, which engages into an active learning, and others as well. Think of technology not just for the sake of technology, and obviously I know in architecture you use a lot of technology, but it's part of that learning process and how it can enhance what you're doing already. And one last thing, then how many of you ever heard of a concept called flipping a classroom? Okay, I had a great cartoon, but I was voted down a couple of months ago. It's a little baby flipping off. No. Flipping the classroom is, if you listen to some people, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I've tried it, and there are good and bad things about it, but the concept could be very good. Traditional classroom, you basically expect students to read or pray that students read something before. You lecture, you hope they listen. You have them do homework, and then eventually test to see if they learn it. That's it. And again, not an architect may be very different. Flipped classroom, students learn prior to the class. And how do they learn prior to the class? Because you create the materials, you create videos, create learning objects, or use other objects, a combination. When they come into class, what do? You do the homework, you do problems. Again, it's more to that. Students learn more, you can have more information done. There were things I used to do in class I don't do anymore. The students have the videos outside. And one of the things that you have, the advantage, is that if a student were to take notes, maybe they're good, maybe they're not. But what do you think they can do with my video that they can't do just taking notes or coming to class? They can listen. What? They can repeat it. They play again. In fact, most students, I did an average, listen to the videos I have 3 times. One student actually, I don't know how many, actually said, I listened to your video and then I looked at the notebook. It is not an easy concept to bring. Some students definitely do not want that, feel it's a lot more work. Some students feel it's more like an online course. But I'm going to try it again. And the advantage of there, you start to listen to what some of the students were talking about technology, is I could have, hopefully, do more closer to what we call mastery of learning. Okay? Let me just have a closeout with the panelists. Gordon, you're first. Yeah, I know. You give me okay. You give me a technical. No. Gordon, Glenn, anything?
Well, the only thing that I would suggest, and based also, I have a son with an engineering degree. My father had an engineering degree. That I hear a lot that architects are different and design students are different. And excuse me, yes, we are, but no, we're not. I think there's a lot of things that work in the kind of project-based one-to-one pedagogy that works with design, that can work with other programs, especially engineering. There are other schools that do that in terms of labs and project-based learning. I know RPI does it, MIT does it, and there are places that do it. It does get faculty sometimes a little bit out of their comfort zone, and you have a lot less control really over what comes out of the class. But I think if you can sometimes separate the product of what they actually made and what they learned and move forward, that it's probably worth the effort. But
Okay. Thank you. And Bruce?
Thank you for coming.
Okay, I won't give you my cell phone number, but if anyone has any questions, again, it's rockland@njit.edu. So thank you very much. Let's hear the panelists.